Hey guys, welcome to The Edge, where we take biblical topics and take them down into bite-sized chunks so that we can kind of get our minds around sometimes very complex issues. And so what we're looking at right now is Genesis 6, 1 through 4, and that passage that precipitated the flood and answers a lot of questions for us about some of the passages in the New Testament. And so I've done part 1 and part 2, so now this is part 3, so it's going to be very important that you listen to part 1 and part 2 before you dive into this one, because I gave a lot of background material on the first parts of the verses, talking about the Bene Elohim, the sons of God, which are fallen angels. I talked about them seeing the daughters of men and being attracted to them, and then leaving their estate and coming down to the earthly abode and trying to marry these daughters of men. And I discussed that. I discussed how wrong the Sethite view is and how that the angel view is the correct view that makes the most sense when we put all the passages together. Anyway, what I want to start with today is I want to go into why did they leave their estate and marry these daughters of men who were very beautiful, so they're very attracted to them. And remember, all angels are males. And why did they intermarry with them? What were they trying to do? I want to tackle that question today. So anyway, the passage that we're looking at, let's refresh our minds there. It says, "Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born to them." So talking about humanity all in general, talking about the female population, that the sons of God, the Bene Elohim, these are fallen angels, remember, saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. So they were attracted to them. So they're going to leave their estate, come to the earthly abode, and leave the second abode, which is the atmospheric heavens or space. And then it says, "And they took wives for themselves, all whom they chose." So they chose wives. That's what they did. So we first have to say, okay, why are they doing this? Why would they do such a thing? Because the penalty for this was very severe that God gave them. Well, it's to understand Genesis chapter 3 and the fact that God predicted to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3 that the Messiah, the anointed one that would crush the head of the serpent, would come from the woman. And Moses writes in there, the seed of the woman. Now, here's the thing, that's an odd statement because seeds don't come from women, seeds come from men. Men carry seed, and it's a reference to sperm, okay? But in that case, in that passage, it's the seed of the woman. So Moses, when he writes that, is hinting at the virgin birth, that the Messiah is going to be come from a virgin birth, a virgin conception. But nonetheless, that means that the Messiah will also be 100% human. Now we know that the Messiah is going to be the God-man, so 100% God, 100% man. And so what Satan is trying to do, he saw that prediction, knows that some man in the future is going to come and destroy him. So what he embarks on doing is to corrupt the genetic coding of humans by mixing it with angelic nature with human nature and creating these monstrosities that we call Nephilim. And we'll get into that another day about the monstrosities that were created. But the bottom line for this intermarriage that was forbidden by God for them to do was to corrupt the line of the Messiah so that the Messiah could never come and never crush the head of the serpent. And so it's a genetic issue. That's what's going on. And obviously, the genetic issue got so out of hand, it precipitated the flood. That's what's happening here. So if we understand that it's a genetic problem, then that explains the references to it in the New Testament passages. So for instance, let me bring this to our forefront. This is 1 Peter chapter 3, 18 through 20. And it's talking about Christ going in to the realm of the dead after he suffered and died, okay? So verse 18 says this, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh and made alive by the Spirit," okay? So then it's going to go into and talk about what happened for the 3 days in which Jesus was in the tomb. What happened? Well, it says in verse 19, "By whom also he went and preached to the spirits in prison," okay, "who were formerly disobedient, when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah." So notice that these spirits in prison that he goes to preach to, while his body is in the tomb, Jesus' soul and spirit go into the underworld we call Sheol in Hebrew, and in Greek it's called Hades. It's the underworld. It's in the center of the planet. And he goes to preach to these spirits in prison that are connected to what they did, the disobedience before Noah's flood. So it says the divine long-suffering waited. So this is talking about pre-flood waiting. So this is all Genesis 6. Okay. So these spirits in prison, let's understand the underworld that's called Sheol or Hades. In the underworld, there are 4 compartments. One compartment is called paradise or Abraham's bosom. This is where believers went when they died, before the cross happened, before the atonement was made by Messiah. Believers went to paradise and Abraham's bosom to await the atonement. Once Jesus made the atonement, in the ascension, according to Ephesians chapter 4, Jesus took the inhabitants, the believers' souls, out of paradise, and he took them with him in the ascension to heaven. So today, when a believer dies, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, and the Lord is in heaven. Therefore, believers are in heaven in the New Jerusalem. But before the cross, Moses, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Samuel, all of them went to Abraham's bosom to await that moment when Messiah made the atonement and would take them into heaven. Okay, so today, that compartment, Abraham's bosom, is empty. The other compartments are for angels and humans. So the other compartment is called the pit, and that's where unregenerate, unsaved humans go to await final judgment at the great white throne judgment, and then eventually be cast into the lake of fire. So they go there. We call that hell, but it's called the pit. So that's where humans, unregenerate humans, go. Then the other area is called the abuso, which is called the bottomless pit. And the bottomless pit is where angels and demons go to be temporarily confined into that area. Okay? So it's temporary confinement in that area. The other area is Tartarus. And Tartarus is where fallen angels go and are permanently confined until the great white throne judgment. And when we put all the passages together that I'm going to go over in 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and Jude, what you start finding out is that these angels that did this in Genesis 6 are bound in Tartarus. So in this passage in 1 Peter, what Jesus did, he went to Abraham's bosom because he told the thief on the cross, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," and that's Abraham's bosom, so he went there. But then he goes to Tartarus and speaks and preaches to the spirits in prison in Tartarus. And so what could possibly be the message? Maybe it was something to the fact that your doom is sealed. The fact that I'm here means that I have made the atonement. I did the propitiation necessary for the salvation of man. And you guys tried to stop that by trying to corrupt the genetic coding back in Genesis. And so you're unsuccessful. The fact that I'm here and proclaiming victory and then I'm going to rise from the dead, your doom is sealed. So it's something like that possibly. But that's what Peter's trying to refer to. Jude says this, verse 6, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, that's the fallen angels that left the second abode to come to the earthly domain, earthly abode, but left their abode. And again, that's a reference to Genesis 6, because then what did they do? They intermarried and created Nephilim. So Jude says he has reserved an everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So again, Jude is remarking that when they did this, the penalty was they would be in everlasting chains in Tartarus until the great white throne judgment, and then eventually thrown into the lake of fire. Now, let me move to a third passage in the New Testament. This is 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. And this is where we get the concept of Tartarus here. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, again, those angels, it's not talking about the fall of the angels with Satan. It's talking about Genesis 6. But cast them down to hell, Tartarus, okay? That's how we know this is not the original fall with Satan, because Satan and other fallen angels are not bound in Tartarus. They are free roaming, right? Satan free roams. All the other fallen angels free roam, right? And he says, and deliver them into chains of darkness, same terms that Jude is using to be reserved for judgment. Okay, so that's where we have the attestation of the penalty to what happened to these angels who did this by intermarrying with human women. Again, it was for the corruption of the genetic coding to prevent the Messiah from coming. And then the penalty, as you can see, is that these angels then were cast into Tartarus. They're bound there permanently until the great white throne judgment, and then are eventually cast into the lake of fire. So, okay, so we have now the penalty and the reason for it. Okay, now I want to give you Second Temple background information. Now, what I'm about to tell you is Second Temple rabbinic literature, rabbinic thought of the first century or Second Temple era. Okay, what do I mean by that? The Second Temple era encapsulates the first century, where Jesus, in Jesus' day, encapsulates prior to Jesus. It encapsulates all the way up, through 70 AD with the writing of the New Testament, okay? So when I say Second Temple era, it's a big span of time. During that period of time, and they'll call this the silent era, where none of the prophets are giving information. The last prophet is Malachi, and so you go about 400 years, so to speak, somewhere in that time frame of complete silence from any prophets whatsoever. So out of the 400 years, then the first prophet to speak is John the Baptist. So it's during this period of time that you have rabbinic thought, rabbinic literature start popping up, okay? And one of the works that pop up is first Enoch. And again, a lot of this rabbinic literature was actually put into the Bible by the Catholics. And so it's not a Catholic thing, it's a rabbinic thing. And a lot of they put like the Apocrypha in the Catholic book, the Catholic Bible. Again, a lot of that was to combat what Luther and the Reformists were doing, because they were coming after the Catholics saying, hey, look, man, you're doing prayers for the dead, that's unbiblical, and you're doing indulgences and all this other stuff. So the Catholics borrowed this rabbinic literature and put it in the Catholic Bible to substantiate what they were doing. Anyway, it's a misnomer to say this is Catholic material. It is not Catholic material. It's Second Temple era Jewish material. Now, again, it is not on par with Scripture. It's not that at all. But it does give us some history of what was going on at the period of time, especially like 1st and 2nd Maccabees. That gives us the idea about the Maccabean revolt. That's where we get a lot of our history. And again, those books are not canonical, but they do give us some insight on the history of what was happening during the Maccabean revolt. Okay, the same is true about 1st Enoch. It is not on par with Scripture. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying this is what you hang your hat on. I'm saying it gives Second Temple information about what the thought of the day was during Jesus' day, the days of the apostles. So what was the background information in their minds when they read Genesis chapter 6? Okay? So this is what they knew, this as far as their background information. I'm not saying it's true, but it is what they all thought about. And so I want to read 1st Enoch. I'm going to start in chapter 6, and I want you to see some of this material that they knew. This is Enoch, 1st Enoch chapter 6, verse 1 says this: "In those days when the children of man had multiplied, it happened that there were born unto them handsome and beautiful daughters." Okay, same kind of idea of Genesis 6, right? "And the angels, the children of heaven, saw them and desired them." So we're on the same path here, okay? "And they said to one another, Come, let us choose wives for ourselves from among the daughters of man, and beget us children." Okay, same concept. Now, verse 3, this is where the extra biblical material comes in. And again, I'm not saying this is true, but this is what Second Temple era Jewish people understood. Verse 3, "Then Simyas, being their leader, said unto them, I fear that perhaps you will not consent that this deed should be done, and I alone will become responsible for this great sin." So here are these fallen angels talking about whether or not they should do it. They realize it's a sin, and they're saying, look, I don't want this one guy, this one fallen angel, Simyas, is saying, hey, I don't want to get caught up in this, and I don't want to be alone. So in verse 4 it says, "But they all responded to him, Let us swear an oath and bind everyone among us by a curse not to abandon this suggestion, but to do the deed." So apparently they all decided under an oath to do this. Again, we're not saying this is Scripture, it's just background information. "Then they all swore together and bound one another by the curse. And they were altogether 200. So 200 of them did this. And they descended into Ardos, which is the summit of Hermon, Mount Hermon in Israel. And they called the Mount Armon, for they swore and bound one another by a curse. And their names are as follows: Simyas, the leader of Erekeb, Ramiel, Tamel, Ramel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakiel, Azel, Armaros, Bartiel, Ananel, Zachiel, Samos, Mas, Pewel, Kestarel, Turel, Yamoyol, and Arazal. These are the chiefs of tens, and of the others with them. Okay? So basically what it's saying, that they all decided to do this, these 200 fallen angels, and they swore an oath on Mount Hermon, on the top of it. Okay? And then in chapter 7 it says, "And they took wives unto themselves, and everyone respectively chose one woman for himself. And they began to go unto them. And they taught them magical medicine, incantations, the cutting of roots, and taught them about plants. And the women became pregnant and gave birth to great giants whose heights were 300 cubits. These giants consumed produce of all the people until people detested feeding them. So the giants turned against them, the people, in order to eat them. And they began to sin against birds, wild beasts, reptiles, and fish. And their flesh was devoured, that one by the other, and they drank blood. And then the earth brought an accusation against the oppressor. So obviously, this happens. It creates these monstrosities of giants. The people on the earth have to feed these guys, which is classic giant literature in all mythologies, that if you don't feed these giants, they come and they eat you, right? I mean, that's like Jack and the Beanstalk, right, type of stuff. And this was a great myths of the ancient world. Anyway, in chapter 8, it says, and Azazel taught the people the art of making swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and he showed to their chosen one bracelets and decorations, shadowing of the eye with antimony, ornamentation and beautifying of eyelids, all kinds of precious stones, and all coloring tinctures and alchemy. And there were many wicked ones, and they committed adultery and erred, and all the conduct became corrupt. So what's happening here is these angels apparently are giving secret information to humans through this bargaining of marrying these women. And they're bargaining with the fathers and the women, giving them secret information. So like we said, the roots and plants and alchemy and basically occultism, right? And telling how women need to beautify themselves and make them more beautiful. And then it goes, Amasras taught incantation and the cutting of roots, and Armaros, the resolving of incantations, and Barakiel, astrology, and Kokariel, the knowledge of the signs, and Tamael taught the seeing of the stars, and Asderel taught the course of the moon as well as the deception of man. So what all of this is saying is that these fallen angels were teaching humans occultism, how to tap into the spiritual realm, which obviously would exacerbate the problem of sin that's happening that day, along with the monstrosities that were being created. They're teaching them weaponry, they're teaching them armament, they're teaching how women are to beautify themselves. Why? For the temptation of men, and they're teaching them all kinds of occultism. So there's a lot going on here, obviously. And so why am I stating this? Again, it's Second Temple literature, but it's telling you perhaps this is why things got so bad, and this is where man learned things that he would never have learned before had not these fallen angels revealed this information of occultism, weaponry, warfare, all kinds of stuff, basically witchcraft, all that stuff. That's what they're revealing. And that's what the occult means. It means hidden knowledge. Now, that's what they're doing, possibly, okay? And that would explain where all this stuff came from. This is where we have these monstrosities, which we'll talk about. And this is where man is now realizing how to tap in to the spiritual realm and how to do it, is because these fallen angels are teaching it. And again, it's speculation. It's Second Temple literature. I'm not saying it's on par with Scripture, but it does give us a historical background knowledge of what the Second Temple Jewish people knew and thought about when they were understanding Genesis 6. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to talk about more of this in the next episode. I'm going to talk about how this occult information obviously was given to people, but how it's being given today now to people in developing technology and to create spiritual portals and whatnot, and tapping into the occult world. So there's a correspondence here with what's going on now with what's going on back then, because Jesus said it would be like in the days of Noah. And I want to connect the two the next time we talk about this. But suffice it to say, the main reason they were doing this is to corrupt the genetic line of the Messiah. And then I will show you later on in Genesis that it says that Noah's genetics were pure. And that's why him and his family got on the ark and God saved them. And the animals that were on the ark, their genetics were pure too, because God is going to do a restart, because the genetic line gets so fouled up that God has to flood the world and destroy most of the creatures because their genetics are wrong. So anyway, that's where we're going to leave it. We're going to pick up on this next time, so study hard, and we'll see you on another episode of The Edge.